Hey, my name's Mark Fletcher. I want to apologise up front for what's going to be a fairly long and dry, boring video, but it's important because I want to take you through the various discussions and topics related to the MPA magazine supply rule change trial. And the reason I'm doing a video is so that you can hear me talk about it and form your own opinion on where you stand in relation to this trial. The trial is supposed to be underway at the moment. It's not. It's been delayed because of an application to the ACCC. And there's been discussion around this by magazine publishers, by distributors, by a number of newsagents, but also by the ANF, claiming to represent newsagents. And it's because of what the ANF has been saying over recent days. We're filming this on May 4th, Monday, May 4th. And over the last probably 2 or 3 days, the ANF has said a number of things publicly that I think are not as accurate as they could be in relation to the trial. So this is a matter of vital importance to newsagents because magazines are at the core of our business. I want magazines to continue to be important to us. I want magazines to be profitable. I want the ability to access, supply and sell magazines in a way that makes me competitive. The current supply rules don't allow for that. The proposed rule changes don't allow for that. But let's go and have a look at this at the beginning. On the 27th of November 2014, the MPA, Magazine Publishers of Australia, applied to the ACCC for permission to run a trial of new magazine supply rules. In that documentation, which is available from the ACCC website, we can see that the MPA, which is made up, by the way, of Bauer Media, News Corporation and Pacific Magazines. So the MPA represents 3 publishers out of hundreds of publishers we represent in our news agencies today. But the MPA went to the ACCC and they said that they want to trial a new supply model so that they can help reduce costs in the supply chain and help news agents support magazines in a more appropriate way. They talk about the trial as being important for newsagents to help make newsagents more competitive. They say that the longer term aim of the pilot or the trial is to assist in the promulgation and implementation of a distribution code of conduct. The code will have as one of its objectives optimising the supply of magazines to news agencies generally and ultimately increasing the sustainable return on investment for newsagents, publishers and distributors. The reality is they can address this today without a trial. They can supply us fairly today based on our sales data without a trial, yet they choose not to. So, the reason they've had to go to the ACCC is because the publishers, the 3 publishers, and Gotch and Network want to work together. They want to collude, if you like, and they want the ACCC to approve that so that they can conduct a trial. I have no qualms with a trial. I have no qualms with them working together, but I want the rules that they're testing to actually be beneficial to newsagents. So, looking further into the documentation they submitted to the ACCC, they want to trial the refusal of supply or restrict supply of titles with respect to titles that don't meet certain criteria, and they document that in this application. They are clear in saying that they want permission to control more tightly the titles that we receive. And I think that's a good thing. The reality is they can do that today. If we look for a moment at who sells magazines in Australia, we have newsagents over here selling around 50% of magazines, maybe a little bit less. We have supermarkets, petrol stores and convenience stores. Those 3 channels have control over what they get. We don't have control. Yet we're only talking here about trialling something that gives us something a little bit closer to what these guys get, but not exactly as good as what they get. So we're still not going to be as competitive. So in the documentation supplied to the ACCC, The MPA says that it's seeking to reform current magazine distribution model in order to optimise the supply of magazines to newsagents and to assist newsagents to more efficiently manage the magazine category. I don't see anything in this documentation that improves our efficiency. They say the trial is a proof of concept, and part of what they want to prove the concept of is documented in this material they've submitted to the ACCC. They say that the code of conduct will result in an improvement in the commercial viability of news agencies by reducing their business costs while increasing magazine sales. I don't see anything in here that's going to reduce our costs. Maybe a little bit if we don't have to do full copy returns, for those of us who have to do that. But the actual cost of the return is not the problem. There are problems around labour and space and things like that that this trial is not addressing. They say in here that there are facts that they rely upon. That is that newsagents have been oversupplied for a long time. What they don't state is that they've done nothing about it for a long time. So let's go and have a look in detail at the rules that they want to trial. So into the document itself, we go across to, where are we? Annexure A, which is the description of the pilot program. And here they describe how they want this pilot program to work and the rules that they want to trial. And in here, one of the things they talk about is channel relevancy. They want to identify the core skills a newsagent requires to manage the magazine category effectively, to identify the level of newsagency support required to sustain the plan, to provide key learnings and to simplify educational content to develop effective newsagent business building toolkit. So part of what they want to do is help educate newsagents. The reality is newsagents for years have been asking for one thing, and that is to be supplied based on sales data. We provide sales data on a daily basis. Many of us supply this absolutely with pinpoint accuracy, yet that sales data is not used to determine what we're supplied. So I say this is a little bit of smoke and mirrors to say, oh, newsagents over there aren't doing a great job because they're not properly educated. This trial is about us helping to educate newsagents. I don't see that actually in what they propose to do. They talk about helping newsagents to increase sales. There's nothing in this trial about driving an increase in sales. They're not proposing testing any rules that will help improve the ability for newsagents to increase sales. So if we skip through the annexures, and you can read the document, it's available publicly. If we skip through the annexures and go to Annexure B, and Annexure B represents rules relating to the code of conduct. And right now, the ANF is publicly saying, oh, these rules only apply to the trial, they're not what they want to do for the long term. Well, the reality is, if you read all of this documentation supplied to the ACCC, these rules are what the MPA want to test. Because if those rules work, they say they could then be implemented nationally. So here are the rules that they want to test. I'm not going to read them all, you can read them, they're available publicly. In terms of the rules, they talk about minimum sales efficiency. And they say that a distributor will ensure that no title that has a sales efficiency less than the minimum set out in the table below. So if it's a title that sells, say, between 10 and 20,000 copies, it's got to have a sales efficiency of 45%. In other words, 45% of what we receive must sell, otherwise we shouldn't get the title or it shouldn't be distributed. The problem with that is that for a lot of newsagents, you need a sales efficiency of 65% or more just to pay for the space costs. So the table that they've actually got in the document has a barrier that is so low that it actually doesn't allow us to be profitable. In here, rule number 4 on page 3 of Annexure B says, a distributor will not be required to accept early returns from retailers, except where such early return is made by a retailer to correct an error in allocations quantity. In other words, no early returns, unless there's been a mistake. You can't get any clearer than that. A distributor will not be required to accept early returns from retailers except where such early return is made by a retailer to correct an error in allocations quantity. ANF representatives are going around the country at the moment saying Mark Fletcher is wrong. Newsagents will be able to early return. So here we are, Annexure B, Part 2, Distribution Rules, model rules for the future that the MPA wants to trial. On page 3 it says no early returns. It's black and white. There is no wriggle room here. This is black and white, no early returns. If that's not their plan, why is it in the trial? The trial is about testing new magazine supply rules. It doesn't make sense to me that they're testing this thing that they say they don't care about. It's here because they care about it. So this is in the documentation. It then goes on and talks about various other rules that they want to trial. They say one of the reasons they're concerned and that they're doing this trial is because newsagents are indiscriminately, here actually on Annexure C, the MPA says, as a consequence of these time and cost requirements, newsagents have become increasingly disengaged in the magazine sector. This includes their engaging in conduct such as indiscriminate and early returns of magazines. This is damaging to publishers and also ultimately to the newsagents who are losing out on sales due to product not being properly managed at the retail level. So, the ANF is saying it's not about early returns. The MPA is saying early returns can't be allowed, and the MPA is saying in Annexure C, point 7, newsagents are indiscriminately early returning. So I think that makes it clear that early returns are part of the trial. And they're part of the trial because publishers and distributors don't want early returns. The problem with this is that the MPA has provided no evidence of their claim. They've not listed examples of where newsagents are indiscriminately early returning. Early returning right now is the only mechanism we have within our businesses to manage cash flow. It's the only tool we have to manage cash flow. If you've been a newsagent for say 5 years, go back and look at what your Gotcha network account was average per month 5 years ago, and have a look at what it is today. The difference is not great, if at all. Now go and have a look at your magazine revenue from 5 years ago versus today. And your revenue in that period is down probably around 20 to 30%. So over a 5-year period, your revenue has dropped 20 to 30%, yet your magazine inventory cost remains the same. So the cost of doing business has increased, and you as a newsagent have had no control over that. The only mechanism you have to control your level of indebtedness is early returns. This trial includes as one of its rules testing a rule which denies you the ability to early return, contrary to what the ANF says. Now when I challenged somebody at the ANF about this, their response indicated to me they hadn't read this documentation from the MPA. I think anybody who has an opinion about this ought to read this documentation. This whole thing is on the ACCC website. I think it's vital that you read it. So, while I'm not going through this in detail, I've touched on what I see as key concerns in this application to the ACCC. So what's happened since they put this application in November last year? The ANF wholeheartedly endorsed the MPA proposal. I would think they've probably endorsed it without proper care and consideration of what's being trialled. So once I got a chance to look at this and see that the ACCC was very close to agreeing that this trial goes ahead, representing newsXpress members, I wrote on the 1st of April to the ACCC, and this letter is also on the ACCC website. In this letter, I said that that newsXpress requests that the ACCC hold a conference to discuss the draft determination as invited at paragraph 27 of the draft determination. I've said that at the heart of the current magazine distribution model is systematic anti-competitive behaviour, which shackles newsagents compared to most other retailers of magazines. We have evidence supporting our claim of systematic anti-competitive behaviour. The trial does nothing to test process and rule changes which would make newsagents more competitive. This trial does nothing to enable newsagents to be competitive against Coles and Woolworths and other businesses selling magazines. So in that 2-page letter I said to the ACCC, the trial does nothing to improve the position of newsagents, and newsXpress would like to see the ACCC hold a conference. On the same day, a little bit later on, representing Tower Systems, my news agency software company, I explained from a Tower point of view that where we see data and how news agencies perform in their data, this is where I think the trial is flawed. And I went on to document that. That letter is also on the ACCC website. So the ACCC responded to the newsXpress letter, and they held a conference. And that conference was around 10 days ago. And it was a conference held in the Sydney office of the ACCC. They had a video link to Brisbane, to Canberra, to Melbourne, to Adelaide and to Darwin. So this was a conference link-up. Through the news agency blog and elsewhere, I promoted this conference to newsagents. I attended in Sydney. You had the ANF there in Sydney. You had News, Pacific, Bauer there. You had legal people there. You had the MPA there. You had Gordon and Gotch representatives there. There was a representative from Universal Magazines. So it was a cast of thousands in Sydney, and some newsagents as well. Interstate, you had newsagents in each of the states. The most newsagents represented were newsXpress newsagents, but there were also some independent newsagents. There were no newsagents representing Newspower, Lucky Charm, WH Smith, or Nextra, and any of the various versions of Nextra. So the conference itself went for around 2 hours. I submitted a 10-page pre-decision conference submission on behalf of newsXpress. This document is available on the ACCC website. And if you can't find this document, the MPA document, the newsXpress letter, or the Tower letter, send me an email and I'll happily send them to you. But they are available on the public register of the ACCC website. So in this document, I outline my concerns with the MPA trial. But prior to doing that, I provide an overview of the current magazine supply model. And I start with a background story and explain that up until 1999, all newspapers and magazines distributed in Australia were distributed through newsagents. And then in 1999, the John Howard government decided to deregulate the distribution of print media. And he used the ACCC to guide through this deregulation. And so that meant that our ACCC government-mandated monopoly was broken down, and it was taken away from newsagents, without compensation, I should say. So that meant that Coles and Woolworths, 7-Eleven and others could go direct. So previously, 100% of all print media went through us. We go to where we're at today in 2015, and now around 50% of magazines go through our channel. So I don't have a problem with deregulation as such. I don't have a problem with a more competitive marketplace. What I say in this document, and what has actually happened, is that deregulation became unfair for newsagents. The magazine supply model that we have today is a supply model that existed back in the world of regulation, back in the world of our monopoly. It's a supply model that's pre-1999. 7-Eleven, Coles, Woolworths, petrol and convenience stores operate under a supply model that's post-deregulation. They control what they get. In some cases, they don't have to return. In some cases, I don't know, but I wonder whether they pay based on scan-based sales. So in our situation, 2015, today, our magazines are supplied on the basis of rules that were set up and established for a regulated channel. Yet our competitors today have rules that have been established for a highly competitive channel. They take anything between 35 and 200 titles. We can carry 1,000, 1,400 titles, 85% of which are not profitable. And that claim, by the way, is verifiable in data. So in my submission to the ACCC, I gave a brief history lesson and said, what we want today is to be commercially competitive. We want to be able to compete with them. The public benefit in that is that our businesses will be stronger, and the benefit of our businesses being stronger is that we can compete with the supermarkets and petrol stores and convenience stores. If we are not able to compete on equal terms, there'll be fewer news agencies, and that doesn't help the public benefit. So it doesn't help competition. So back to my submission. So I talk about the magazine supply model. I give a couple of examples. The current supply model is anti-competitive, and I make 6 points about how it's anti-competitive. And then I talk about early returns, and I say that at point 4B of Form A submitted by the MPA, they claim that newsagents engage in indiscriminate early returns. This statement is inaccurate and ought not be relied on to justify the proposed trial of newsagent magazine supply rule changes. Early returning magazines is the only mechanism newsagents have to manage cash flow. The magazine distributors will dispute this. They will say that newsagents can request supply adjustments and the elimination of titles. Such a statement would be inaccurate. While some requests by newsagents to distributors to reduce or cut altogether supply of titles are attended to, such action is only of a short term. The distributors often immediately replace cut titles with new titles, and often after 3 months, the cut titles reappear. Early returning by newsagents is the only means available to manage their level of indebtedness. And then I go on and talk about the fact that there are 3 types of early returns. The MPA document just talks about early returns. So this is the first time the ACCC is hearing about 3 types of early returns. I say that there are returns of all stock of a title on the day the title arrives in business, which I think is not good behaviour by newsagents. The second type of early return is the return of some stock the day a title arrives in the business, probably because too much has been sent. I agree with that. The third type of early return is the return of some or all stock ahead of the distributor set return date, but some days or weeks after the title first arrived in business. And that's probably a reasonable thing if a newsagent is doing that on the basis of how a title is performing. I've spoken to magazine publishers about this, and I have a number of publishers who say, I don't want everything returned the day it goes in, but I'm happy with the other 2 types of returns where there's a considered approach to early returning. In this document, I also talk about the public benefit. The best way to serve the public benefit, and the public benefit test is a test that the ACCC has. The best way to serve the public benefit is in the availability of magazines is to provide newsagents with the ability to control magazine supply, as it is only this which allows them the ability to come close to competing with their competitors. So the MPA, Gotcha Network don't want newsagents to control supply. And they don't want that because we provide a compliant channel through which they can push their product. I understand that serves their business purposes, but it doesn't serve our business purposes. So in terms of the MPA application, if you go to page 6 of my submission to the ACCC, page 6, page 7, page 8, over those 3 pages I'm quite explicit in my detailing of what I think is wrong with the MPA application. So, for example, at point 4A of Form A, the MPA states The MPA submits that the proposed code of conduct will result in an improvement in the commercial viability of news agencies by reducing their business costs while increasing magazine sales. To that I say, no evidence has been provided to support this claim. All tasks involved in the receipt of magazine goods for sale, pricing them, managing them in store, selling them, removing them at the end of the on sale, counting returns, removing covers from returns will still need to be done. The only saving will be the elimination of some of the freight component of returns. So I go through over 3 pages and I'm very specific about concerns in the trial. I just want to turn to the point about early returns. So at Annexure B, Part 2, Point 4, Early Returns, I say our view is that newsagents ought to have the ability to early return any title based on agreed criteria that is negotiated with a panel of newsagents and not their industry association representatives. So I'm making the point that there needs to be a discussion, a conversation around early returns. There needs to be maybe some rules so that they're not indiscriminate. But I think we need to be fair and professional in our approach rather than just saying no early returns. At Annexure B, Part 2, Point 6, New Titles. While we note that the proposed rules allow for newsagents being advised the quantity to be distributed of new titles, there is no allowance for newsagents to be able to set their desired quantity. This is an extraordinary oversight, I say. At 6B, the MPA notes the number of copies launched based on the print run. I say there's no consideration in this rule for newsagents and their businesses. What if they do not have the space for a new title? What if the area of interest covered by the new title is satisfied by magazines from another distributor? What if the newsagent doesn't want to stock the title? Basing allocations on a print run continues the current distribution model that sees newsagents competitively disadvantaged compared to supermarkets and other retail channels. I could go on and read more from this submission. What I want to kind of end up saying is newsXpress proposed an alternative trial. It proposed an alternative trial for a select group of stores where control over the titles to be received in those stores was set centrally, where the volume was set centrally, where magazine distributors advised new titles and permission was sought on whether those titles could be carried. Because the range of titles and the volume was set centrally by the newsagents participating in the trial, there would be no early returns because the oversupply and the over-ranging issues were addressed. No reissuing, unless it's been approved as part of a reissue process like what Universal magazines do with the bundling of their magazines. No full copy returns of unsold stock, and the option for the publisher to pay participating newsagents a stocking fee to carry a title that doesn't meet minimum financial performance criteria. So that was proposed as part of this submission to the ACCC. I haven't heard anything from the MPA or directly from Gotch or Pacific or News Corp about the submission or the proposed alternative. At the conference itself, which went for 2 hours, every newsagent, every individual newsagent who spoke against the trial. There was not a single newsagent, including a newsagent who's participating in the trial, not a single newsagent who supported the trial. The only representative of our news agency channel supporting the trial was the CEO of the ANF. And that concerns me because he said, from what he understands, newsagents will have control over what they get and they'll be able to early return. As I said at the conference, there is no evidence in the submission to the ACCC that newsagents will control what they get and that newsagents will be able to early return. So there appears to be a disconnect between this submission to the ACCC and what the ANF is saying is going to happen as part of the trial of these rules which don't allow us to control supply and the rules which don't allow us to early return. And that's concerning because we have an industry body over here saying, oh, don't worry, here's the situation. Yet we have a lawyer's letter to the ACCC saying, here's the situation. This and that are two different things, which is why this submission from newsXpress becomes very important. I'm all for the MPA trialling a more efficient model. I 100% support that. But I think they need to discuss the appropriate model with newsagents who want to grow magazine sales. Magazine sales in one of my news agencies are up more than 10% year on year. At the conference where there was discussion and the ACCC welcomed free-flowing discussion between participants, I asked the MPA whether they'd gone and had a look at the performance of news agencies where magazine sales were growing. And I asked the question because I figured if the MPA knows there are news agencies growing magazine sales, they could go and have a look at those businesses and say, why don't we do more of that? Whatever's helping those businesses grow, why don't we do more of that? And the head of the MPA said, no, they haven't looked at that. It's clear to me that the MPA trial process and the rules have been established primarily for the benefit of publishers and distributors. They have not taken into account what's happening in successful news agencies. They've not taken into account the retail space cost, the labour cost, and the challenges that we have of being competitive against supermarkets and petrol stores and convenience stores that do have absolute control over supply. Some publishers take the action of the newsXpress submission and comments by newsagents, they take it as a personal attack on their businesses, and it's not that. This is action by newsagents who believe in magazines. They want magazine sales to grow, but they want to do it on a base that's fair and equitable for newsagents and the customers they serve. So, if you're going to have an opinion about the MPA supply rule changes and the trial of these new rules, I think it's very important that you go to the ACCC website, you read the MPA submission, you read the submission from a whole bunch of newsagents, you read the newsXpress submission to the pre-conference, the pre-decision conference. And I think it's important that you take the time to read all of that to come to your own conclusion. Don't believe what I'm saying here, because I'm telling you what I think. I'm sharing with you my opinion. Don't believe what the ANF representative might say when they knock on your door or call you on the phone, because they're only sharing their opinion. Anybody who has an opinion about this, you've got to say to them, have you read the MPA proposal? Have you read the newsXpress submission? I say the newsXpress submission only because it's the one that I know intimately. It's 10 pages, I wrote it. But there are equally other submissions that you should read on the public register on the ACCC website. Make yourself informed so that if you're going to have an opinion, it's an informed opinion. I don't kind of care whether you agree with me or not. That's not what this video is about. This video is about saying out there on the public record, you can do your own research and that research will help you reach your own conclusion. I don't think the MPA trial has been thoughtfully constructed. I don't think the trial actually is trialling any changes that will benefit newsagents. I don't think the trial improves our competitive situation. I don't think the trial improves our ability to sell magazines. I don't think the trial improves our ability to be more profitable with magazines. I think there are things that the MPA could trial that would help us achieve those goals. But for the MPA to want to do that, they actually want to genuinely work with newsagents from the ground up on developing something that's more successful and beneficial for the channel. Thanks for watching. I'd be very happy to talk to anybody individually about this. I'm also very happy to talk to any of the associations who want to have a discussion about it. The sad thing is, I don't think they do. You know, I've heard of ANF representatives who are going out and talking and saying, oh, Mark thinks this and Mark thinks that. Every single one of those people haven't spoken to me. They've not said, Mark, what do you really think about this? They've got talking points internally from the organisation that they're using to try and discredit, because the MPA's invested a lot in this with the ANF politically. But the reality is this trial, as it currently stands, is not good for newsagents. And I think that's why we've got to fight it. Thanks for watching.